Good evening, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving Eve. I hope you all are working on your turkeys and put those up for just a second to watch this meaningful ILEETA Live with our special guest, Myles Cook, and our co-host, Dwayne Wolf and Dan Green. We're going to have some fun tonight, get into some meaningful conversation. But first, I want to cover some housekeeping things here. Let me see if I can find these. I'm sure you got the email. If you didn't get the email, check your email for the ILEETA Holiday Pop-Up Store. We got some awesome stuff for sale. It's great prices, some tumblers, a hoodie, a sweatshirt, some shorts that Joe was really liking there, t-shirt, and a beanie, I think is what they have. And also a special discount for some Cutco knives from the Knife Guy. There's some information there, cutcomiked@gmail.com. Email him, text him at that number there, and it'll give you a special discount. Also, Holiday Brew. Can't go wrong with some good coffee. We all love some coffee. It makes the day go better. So grab some coffee there. Without further ado, our special guest, Myles Cook. I always like having a veteran during November, and November is a very special month to a lot of us. It is not only Veterans Day in November, but it's the Marine Corps birthday. So we have a Marine here, Myles Cook. And Myles, for those that have not met you, don't know who Myles is, go ahead and tell us a little bit about who Myles is.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm currently the training coordinator at the Walters State Regional Law Enforcement Training Academy. It's a wonderful, wonderful place. We train about 200 to 250 officers a year. And prior to that, I worked at the Tennessee College of Applied Technology with Wayne South, who some of you may know. And we developed a criminal justice program through the technical college. And prior to that, worked years in law enforcement, all between narcotics and patrol, corrections, all kinds of stuff.
Very cool. I know Dwayne and Dan have some awesome questions to jump in, but here's what I want to know, Myles. How did the Marine Corps, the military, prepare you for your career, and not just law enforcement, but your career as a law enforcement instructor?
Yeah, so I think, Brian, I think that's a great question. And my time with the Marine Corps is probably a bit unusual. And so I'd already been in law enforcement for a number of years before I joined. I was 28 when I joined. I turned 29 a week into Paris Island. And so I had already, been a supervisor on patrol. I'd worked in narcotics. I had federal task forces, things like that. And I knew I needed to serve. I wanted to serve desperately bad. Much to my wife's chagrin, we had been together for a long time and had got married. And 6 months after our wedding, I said, I've got to go. And so I joined and went out to training. And so I think the Marine Corps, as a Marine Corps infantryman on the reserve side, and I think it taught me a lot, probably more about discipline and what that truly means, mental and physical discipline, and how important that is, how important your bearing can be, especially in those situations, and trying to remain calm under stress or stressful situations, and trying to adapt and coach others to be successful. And maybe more than anything, a healthy amount of humility. And so I what I would consider when I joined, already a professional, and I come out as I'm nearly a 30-year-old private at that point. And so those around me are 17, 18, whatever. My first platoon sergeant was somebody that I was partnered with in the neighboring agency in narcotics. And so it was a very different path for me. And I would say humility. you know, you didn't want to let people down in that circumstance and or disappoint people. And I certainly learned what I needed to do, not to do that, and and try to operate in that environment.
Thanks, Dan. No, humility is a huge asset and a huge characteristic of trait for any law enforcement instructor, and I think it's critical that we um, reflect on that humbleness at the end of the day as we look in the mirror at ourselves and reflect and say, how did I get to where I'm at today, and who do I owe for being here this this career.
Absolutely.
This profession is just we owe it to a lot, and I'm sure, like you, the military has done a lot for me. Dwayne, I know you had some good questions there. So what's on your mind?
Well, Myles, in preparation for this, I listened to your interview with Brian Willis to get a better background on you. And there's a couple of things out of that interview, the changes that you've made in your program, in your teaching, and how you've revised the program based upon your knowledge and wanting to change things to improve things. So my first question for you is, what was the toughest part of initiating those changes in your organization when you try and take it from the way we've always done things to the way I think things ought to be done?
I think it's a great point. Or if nothing else, at least let's try this. And if it doesn't work, we can go back, right? I think so. That was a wonderful talk with Brian Willis, and that kind of gets into the disruptive discourse or the objective driven training. And I never realized that I had such a drive for problem solving at the end of the day, and that's what it's kind of morphed into. And so to answer your question, we changed lots of things, and I'll say a very similar thing that I said to Brian. My director at our agency is a wonderful leader, and so when I come on board directly behind him, I said, I think I've got some ideas to move this in a direction that makes more sense based on what we want to see. And he take it and run with it. That's what he said. And I think if I remember correctly, I told Brian, if you're going to rock the boat, you better have a good captain, right? And you better have some good shipmates. And that's exactly what I've got. So we completely revamped physical training, and that was something I definitely have had a drive to do. And we've nearly completely revamped our firearms training, with still a lot of work to do there. And I did it with the full trust of the director, and he kind of let me take it. And the interesting point, I think, maybe on the range more so than anything for firearms, a lot of longtime instructors. We had a couple out there that were wearing red shirts before I was born, and you need to build an amount of trust there to come in with new ideas. And so I think that was probably the first step, was building really good relationships with those, because we use a lot of adjunct instructors, from around the state, and building those relationships. I think was the main part, and then kind of slowly, hey, what are we doing here? What's our point? Why are we doing this? Could this be a better way? Let's try it. Let's see how it turns out. And I think we did that in a lot of areas.
So how is it that you worked with the adjunct instructors to get everybody on board? I come from a teaching background where
Yeah.
Half the time we were teaching with full-time staff, and then you still have to worry about getting people on board and whether or not that happens or doesn't. And then you have another program we do in the summer where most of the instructors would be outside instructors. What were the difficulties that you found in getting everyone coordinated and on the same page? And was that possible with you?
So I think it's possible, and I think it is dependent. And obviously, I think you know this, Dwayne. It's dependent on the instructor. It's dependent on the topic, and it's dependent on you know. So when I talk about objective driven training or disruption or things like that that I enjoy talking about, a lot of times we're talking about problem reframing, and so I think a majority of the time I would maybe frame these things in such a way. I'll give you an example. Um, if you're telling students on the firing line that they need to move in a gunfight, and then you tell them they can never move on a firing line, though those objectives don't meet up, right? It doesn't make sense. And so, you know, we start movement with the firearms the second day, the morning of our second day of training for firearms. And there's some question, and I took those questions. Is this the fundamentals? Like, is this, what we should be doing? And to a very real point, yes. I think I can make a really good argument why moving is a fundamental of gunfighting or performance handgunning. And so, we went back to that even, and I could talk about this all day, Dwayne. But even our first two drills are very unique now, and so we do, and I learned a lot from a guy in the performance world named Billy Barton, and he's become a dear friend of mine. He's world's outstanding performance shooter. And so we start our range days with a Ben Stager style trigger control at speed and predictive doubles for a grip assessment. And most people would never understand that unless you understand the reason why that is. And so, and I made the frame very clear. All right, I talk about this with the instructors. If we want, under stress, under duress, we want that gun locked into a vise, regardless of any other environmental design type things. Just even if we're talking about the range, then we've got to train them how to do that. And the way to do that is not equal height, equal light, press, spin to the rear, listen for an audible reset, and then do it again. That's one way to see your sights, and that's one way to treat a trigger. And the fact is, very few gunfights happen like that, if any, and no performance shooters shoot like that. And so we're not going to train them that way. And so, we start the very first drill of the day, live fire. You're shooting about 0.15 to 0.2 splits on an audible signal. And then you're learning how to handle that gun. And we shoot predictive doubles, not as a shooting style, but as a grip assessment. And so in some ways, something that is very common and well known now, maybe in the performance handgunning world, is making its way into our world and just building fantastic shooters. But we have to. That argument was made to the instructors, like, this is the actual fundamentals that are needed, and let's do it, and we'll kind of prove that we can build better shooters.
If I jump in here and kind of like piggyback on a lot of what you just said here, Myles, because one of my questions for you was, a clarification on what you call objective driven training. Because in my mind, I wanted to hear what your mind thinks of that, right? Like my mind can translate that differently, but I really wanted to hear what was in your mind, and you're giving me some of that. You're giving me some of that, and it sounds good. So, would it be fair for me to say that the transition in your training at your police academy in terms of objectives are are rooted in reality when it comes to what your officers are going to actually need to do with their firearm versus what they're going to need to do to pass a test.
Yeah, I think so. So just to take the firearms straight from the top, obviously the standing steel qual, all your trainers, we know a lot of the same trainers, like we know that is not the way, right? There is a better way. And I think with if call it objective driven training, I'll kind of explain it, or at least where my mind sits on it. It is the constant thought that there is no way that I'm the best in the world at doing this. There always has to be some area of improvement or some better way. And so, I think we really went back to the drawing board with our firearms about what we actually wanted. And so in objective driven training, we might talk about the end of the day, like what does success look like? What do we actually want? Or what are the root characteristics or problems like associated with it? So, like say you want a good shooter. Well, that may mean something to me. That may mean something to Brian. That may mean something to Wayne. It's what's a good athlete? Well, ask a bodybuilder, ask a CrossFitter, or ask a marathon runner, right? They're all kind of different things. And so I know for me, it was just the basic what success looked like, the objectives that I actually wanted, and then tailoring our training to those. So if I want you to be able to move, and I want you to be able to reload and make decisions, standing on a line is not complementary to that. It's not working. And so we've done a vast amount of things, in that realm. Even very simple things. So we changed up our quote unquote stress course. In our state, we have to have one, or a decision making course, and it's the same. It's practically the same course as it was previously, but I give you like two very simple decisions to make on reloads and movement, and you can watch an OODA loop fry like an egg. It just starts turning, right? It's like, all right, now we're getting somewhere. But I'll tell you where that really came from, Dan. We were going from the range to scenario training, right? And you know what that looks like. And I see folks going way outside of the bounds of the Constitution on third-party warrantless entries. And then I see, maybe we started having firearm-specific scenarios. So not so much call for service style, just very range centric scenarios, and just standing in the open, no movement. And then I walk out there and I'm like, I showed you how to take cover. We explained it. Well, no, I really didn't, Dan. I told you exactly what yard line you were going to, exactly what cover you were going to use. And I never, ever had you make a decision for yourself on how to accomplish that task. And so I think some of those things have certainly changed. And 2025, we're going to go to a hit factor style of scoring for our qualification. And I'll be curious to hear if there's any other academies in the nation that are doing that. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear.
Say what, Dan?
Can you explain what that is?
The hit factor scoring?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So hit factor scoring is one of the ways to score in performance handgunning, or in handgunning competition. But I wanted to find a way. You talk about objectives, Dan, right? Like my objective is for you to build good accuracy and be able to balance that with speed. Both really important factors. The thing I did not like in firearms training necessarily are strict par times. And the reason for that, you talk about things that are being passed on and the actual objectives that you're looking for. So let's say you got a string of fire, you go back to the 15, you got let's just say a 6-second par time. Dan shoots it in 6.2 because Dan wasn't good at the 15-yard line and he took more time to make an accurate shot. Does Dan deserve to fail that string because he made a smart decision? And is that not the decision I would want him making on the street? And so, I don't think the objective is correct there. The success at the end of the day is not necessarily what I thought it looked like. And so hit factor scoring is a way, and basically it's math to say points per second. And so you come up with a numeric value of points gained per second. So in other words, it is a scored balance of speed and accuracy. You might have somebody shoot more accurate and be slower, and somebody shoot a little bit less accurate and be faster. And those scores start to balance out. And it's a really interesting, unique way to score that based on your abilities and what you're trying to do in that string of fire.
That sounds pretty awesome. And I like how you also define things like good shooter. Earlier you mentioned like good shooter can be defined in multiple different ways, but it sounds to me like though for success in your training environment, you have tried to define it by using research based in officer involved shootings, previous officer involved shootings. What do they tell you? What does it mean? How do young officers make decisions, and how do we help them get better at that? How do we manage the stress the body is under? So good shooter, it sounds like you've helped to define that for your officers by using a potluck of different research.
So we really dove into it. And I know Dwayne has dove heavily into that kind of stuff, but it's interesting when you talk about trying to frame that with instructors. It's it's very simple. Like if they left today from this line and these were the only skills they had, and they had to test them tonight out on the street, would you train it any other way? And the answer is invariably yes. It's just, well, then what are we doing? Right? Let's do something different. And I'm sure Dwayne Mike can speak to this better than I can, but a good majority of OISs look more like a bill drill than a qualification. 6 rounds, 0.15 splits at 7 yards, as quick as your eyes can see, as quick as you can process information. And if that's the case, then I want to train them to think and to be able to do that. I don't want the first time you do that to be out on the street. And so it's a healthy mix. It's a healthy mix of performance handgunning and trying to do the very best that we can with what we know about adult learning and some of that stuff. And I know we really went back to 4 domains, and the main domains were our current understanding and concepts of performance handgunning, concepts and our current understanding of use of force, decision making, and OISs, the concepts of adult learning and coaching as it relates to motor skill acquisition, retention, motivation, performance under pressure, and then human performance as it relates to motor skill degradation, emotional regulation, in high stress environments and decision making. And so anything that we changed or tried to advance in that training was really somewhere in those 4 domains.
That's a lot to digest for a lot of instructors. How challenging was that to get all your instructors on board, and how long did it take to get that information to your instructors to digest, to get for them to start teaching that?
I think number one, I've got wonderful instructors out there. And even though, a lot of times they're just out there online, we're always talking back and forth or sending each other videos or talking training methodology and things like that. For some of them, it took an amount of time. And I spent a lot of time putting together an entire quote unquote red book, of just what I call training belief statements, so one of them, for example, would be skills over drills. And this will ring a bell, true with you all. I don't care how good somebody can do single hand at the 7-yard line, right? And I don't care if we do it 15 times in a row. That's not actually helping anyone. I want to build the actual skills to be able to transfer that into a drill. And so we just started writing those things out and getting folks on board. And it wasn't that difficult, at least for me. It wasn't that difficult. I was very lucky. I'm very blessed to have just some amazing instructors out there.
Very
Well, based
cool.
on my previous experience, I'd say you're extremely lucky to have instructors like that, because usually there's perhaps just a wee bit of pushback along the way from all kinds of factions and all kinds of factors that is one of those things we have to deal with as instructors on a regular basis based on where you work and who you work with.
Yeah, I think that's true, Dwayne. And I tell you, I think maybe the biggest help for me was, there is no one technique, there is no anything, right? And so really focusing on principles, whether that be grip, whether that be trigger work, whatever that might be, all the way down the line, the principles of that. I think it was easier understood in principle than maybe just arguing techniques or whatever.
I'd also imagine that some of these talented instructors were part of your building cadre, your construction cadre for the program. So you got this higher level of buy-in.
Yeah, I think a lot of buy-in for that, especially. And so, and I don't do anything. I want it to be a team effort, and so we talk it over. And I was actually at ILEETA 2 years ago when I heard this. It's hard to be a prophet in your own land, and so I certainly get outside help. If you bring, it's like I was talking about with Billy Barton. If you bring the person who won sideline matches at nationals, and he says it, sometimes folks will listen up, and it's an easier sell that way. And so, especially when you talk about varying trigger work and varying sight pictures and stuff like that.
So when this recording lands into the ears of academy instructors and academy directors across the country, you are now the fly-in professional. So I would highly encourage to go seek someone like Myles Cook if you want to talk about changing your culture at your academy or training.
I enjoy changing it. You mentioned physical training, right? And I usually like at ILEETA last year, we start out with kind of the physical training, and it was a big thing. It was something I really wanted to tackle because I got slower when I went to the academy as a runner, right? And of course, I got weaker at Paris Island. But when you go from 190 to 154 pounds, that generally happens. And I just thought there were some general problems. And it was an outset of objectives, and I wanted everybody, no matter how fit or unfit, to get stronger and faster. And I wanted to maintain the group fitness aspect. And I knew it was possible. I just needed to find out how we could do it. And so we set up maybe the first linearly progressive training program at the academy. And so when folks get to the academy, we test them on a 1.5 mile, a 300-meter sprint, 1 minute push-up, 1 minute set-up, and obstacle course. And we take those numbers and we put it into an Excel document that really puts out what they're going to do every single day for the rest of the academy. And it's one of those things, Dan, when you look back at it, it's like, this is not difficult. This is not difficult. We've been doing this for athletes since the 50s, right? This is not too hard. But nobody's ever wondered, I suppose, if it could be done any other way. Because we know what military style group fitness looks like, right? That whoever's at the front is getting slower and whoever's at the back is dying and unable to recover. And so when they get there and we get these numbers, like let's say it's Monday, the first Monday, it might be whatever push-up and sit-up matrix we have, and it may be a 2-mile run at 80% of your 1 mile time trial. And so Me, you, Dwayne, and Brian all run, but my time hack is 18 minutes and 28 seconds. Yours is 22 minutes and 31 seconds. So everybody may run that with their own goal. And it's an absolutely amazing thing, because by the end of the academy, your people out in front are always competitive. You know, your athletes are going to be competitive regardless. And we test in 8 weeks, and I usually see 20 to 25% increase, or technically decrease, in time for our most athletic, and that's pretty good for our advanced. And then we'll see anything anywhere from 40 to 50% decreases in time for our least fit. And they are the most excited about PT, which is a hard thing at 5 a.m., right? And so
everything's hard at 5 a.m. I mean, let's not act like anything is fun.
Yeah. So they become the most excited, because there is like an external driver, or even an internal driver, that they are competing against their old selves, and they've got a mark to meet. And so we have seen just outrageously good benefits. We average 34 to 38% overall improvement every class, every single time, with this programmed PT. And every instructor knows what we're doing every day. Every recruit knows what we're doing every day. There's some amazing things that I didn't account for happen. I don't have to. We run a professional style academy, and so I don't use physical training for punishment. Being physically fit and being an officer is a gift, and so we don't do that. It's very much coach, mentor, and then discipline. And so they run through that, and they're blown away, because they get to see their stats at the end of it, and they're excited about it, and they request programming after it. It's not something that's dreaded, and we've seen wonderful success from it. Much lower injury rates, because it is linearly progressive and scientific, and that's and well thought out, and maybe it's repeatable, which is amazing. And then it's also predictive, and it's really neat. So if Dan is a chief or a sheriff across the state and calls me and says, "Hey, I've got this guy, he's this size, he's running this for a mile and a half, he's doing whatever," we've gotten to a point now with the data where I can give you a pretty good idea of where they'll leave at. And we can't account for heart yet. We can't account for attitude. But if I can get that, we can get there.
And here's why I think this is important for everyone listening in, is the chiefs and the sheriffs and the commissioners listening in. We got to realize that law enforcement is behind in realizing that we are a human performance profession. And we're even further behind in how to design training to catch up on the gap, to close the gap between where we need to be as a human performance profession and where we are. So here's why it's important. It sounds like you're already going down that road. So academies nationwide don't need to reinvent the wheel when they can take pieces of what you've got and then put it into or the whole damn thing and put it into their academy. We got to close that gap. I'm going to guess, I don't know this to be true, and you could prove me wrong, but along that same railroad track, you probably have some elements of mindfulness and breathing and imagery.
Yeah. So I've really tried hard, and this you talk about the push, Dwayne. My next real push, obviously out on the range, is to incorporate more imagery on the range, and into scenarios. And I you brought up Brian Willis, the just unbelievably intelligent, a master at that kind of stuff. And it's great, Dan, that you bring that up, right? And I was talking before the show started about the Royal Marine Commandos, my dear friend Rob, and those guys do it. And professional, who was a high-level soccer player, those guys do it. And the Blue Angels do it. And somehow we just think that's not for us, and I think that's a huge miss.
Well, let's circle back to one of the first observations you made. is it's time to be humble. And in the world of law enforcement, let's humble ourselves and say out loud that my mind could be better, my emotions could be better, my physical state can be better, and some of these more emotional, psychological not treatments. I've had psychological treatment. I got my wires crossed. Some of these practices. These practices are beneficial for us. We are not suits of armor.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It really dawned on me, and I'm not a big football person, but I am from Tennessee. I guess last year before, there was a field goal where UT beat Alabama, right? And they threw the field goal post in the river. It was a huge deal. And I watched that kid, you're talking about 18, 19, I guess, maybe 20, in front of like 120,000 people kick a field goal with, the whole state on the line. And when I watched him do that, I was like, that kid has been taught something that we're missing. We can't, we're missing something that they're getting in sports.
You brought up mental imagery, and I think I've had the opportunity to take Brian Willis's class twice, I believe. Phenomenal class. And what's disappointing is that there's not a lot of people going to that class, and that is a phenomenal class. But you mentioned the Blue Angels, and I hate to admit this, but I was watching TikTok the other night, and the Blue Angels were sitting there at this table, and they were doing all this stuff, mental focused imagery on actually pretending they were in an airplane and talking and moving the joysticks and all this stuff. We are so far behind the 8 ball in law enforcement with the mental imagery training. What are you doing in your courses to promote mental imagery?
Not nearly what I think we could be doing. And that's just the honest answer, Brian. There is such, and it's an excuse, and there's ways to beat it, right? But you talking about a full-time schedule, time crunch, academy, let's hurry up with this meal so we can get here. The time we need to that, it can be hard. We've messed around with some different things. Even I think one thing that goes into that is, and I don't know if you guys shoot dots on handguns, but imagery and the tie between your eyes and the processing. When you go to shooting dots on handguns, it's a huge piece. And so even if it's imagery of what staying target focused, mental imagery of just through the dry fire, working through it, sidelined on the range, then going into dry fire, then going into live fire. I think there's just wild benefit to that, and we're trying to do little pieces of it out there. It's difficult to try to make that happen as much as I would like to, because I think the benefit is there, and I wish it was more well known and more widely used.
One of the things that I did, and again, I took Brian's class. When we left, Brian gave us a bunch of the mental imagery sessions, and I made them available to my students, particularly in firearms class. And there's a 3-step. There's an introduction, then there's a one that covers the essentials, and then it gets into the specific mental imagery drills. One for firearms, there's one for study skills, there's one for sleep, there's one for relaxation, and I made those available to my students. I didn't require it, and I explained to them that, hey, you've got a guy here who makes a lot of money training professional athletes and Olympic athletes doing this, and now you have this opportunity to have this tool for you for free, whether or not you choose
to
use it. Yeah, and I can honestly say that I never monitored who listened to it and who didn't. What I can tell you is when I introduced that, our performance in the range went up. If we had students who didn't qualify, it was no longer a suggestion. It was a requirement for them to go to the mental imagery. And that's probably one of the many things that we did that led to the high rate of qualification, as well as the high qualification standard that we had. Was putting all those things together. And, personally, when you go through the class, you do a mental imagery session for someone in the class, and someone in the class does a mental imagery session for you. I just happen to know that I had to do the Emerson hour that year, the WinX talk that year. And guess what? My mental imagery session was done by my partner on public speaking. And I would say that it had a beneficial effect in that endeavor as well.
It absolutely does, Dwayne. It absolutely does. And I tell you, when obviously you've been on the range a lot, right? And you see that press, and they're waiting, and you see that dive right from that strong side hand, and you know it is anxiety and a balance displacement issue, right? And so a lot of that can be negated through what's going on here. And you put somebody even on a pack timer, right? Things go crazy because your mind is doing crazy things. And so the handgun, even if you take the law enforcement training, so even if you just talk about performance handgunning, the good majority of it is mental and visual. And so if you can start to work through the two rules of shooting a handgun is the sights are on target and you don't move the gun when you pull the trigger. That's the two rules. Physically, it's very, very simple. It's just impossible to master. And the good amount of that is done here and through your eyes. So you got to get your brain right first.
Yeah, it just can't be ignored anymore. The research is too strong. We spend a lot of time training drills. Like you said earlier, we train inside drills to improve skills. And then at some point in time, even in the 100th drill you've run, the mind will still shut you down. So it can't be ignored anymore. Inside law enforcement is the mental training is as powerful. I wanted to throw a curveball, if you don't mind, Myles, and talk about the experience you've got in corrections.
Yes.
So you have experience in, or at least supervising corrections in the state of Tennessee, Carter County, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, sir. So I was a corrections officer and then a supervisor there for a short while. And then I went sheriffs in the state of Tennessee, obviously running the corrections division, the local jail, and then obviously the patrol side and other things. And I did that. And whenever I left there, went to teach at the technical college here, myself and Wayne South developed a new program that wound up becoming fairly popular. And the governor's office picked it up and has put it across the state. And it was just a new way of thinking about corrections training.
So two-part question for you. One is, has anything we've talked about so far, is any of it exclude corrections, or is it all inclusive to corrections as well?
No, I think it's totally inclusive to corrections. And I think corrections, number one, the most difficult job maybe I've ever done, and maybe the most thankless job in the law enforcement realm. And it's a real shame because they need that. They deserve top tier training. And a lot of times they don't get it. And it was a unique thing whenever I went over to begin that program. We started something called a shared training model. And so I had students for months, like 6 to 8 months. And it was really neat because the technical college kind of thrives on certificates, sort of like we do in law enforcement. So state funds could pay for an education, and that student could do that practically for free. And in the span of 6 months, in theory, could get more certifications than most folks would get in 20 years in local corrections. And so it was, as a kind of a paradigm of training or as a system, it's really unbeatable, for what you got. And we started this shared model, and this was an idea we had. A lot of rural area, a lot of local corrections. We're there teaching anyway. Let's partner up with these nearby agencies and host this inside outside training free of charge. Well, it's great for our local agencies. It's a great strategic partnership. And then it's great for the students. If those students sit in there with 20 other corrections officers or peace officers or sworn or not, whatever, they're going to have jobs when they leave. And so it was a beautiful, beautiful partnership. And we wind up getting on with, we had talked to Tennessee Department of Corrections. We had partnered up with the American Jail Association. And our biggest partnership was probably the Tennessee Corrections Institute, the governing body in Tennessee for local corrections. And that partnership, man, they were getting basic courses out of the way. They were, I mean, all kinds of stuff. It was an amazing partnership. I think there's some things that they need to work on, how it's built together, but it's come a long way. And so after that, I got appointed. I sit on the TCI Board of Control now, and as a voting member. And so I've got a huge heart for corrections.
Yeah, I think the second part of that question is actually statement first. One is I think in the world of corrections, I get a chance to talk to a lot of people in corrections and detention across the country, and they're starving for training. And so statement first. It's time now that we really pull that environment forward, that corrections training environment. It's time now to push that forward.
Well, we've been trying to recruit a lot more corrections officers for
how to improve.
And Dan, I think you got you froze up there for a minute, so I think we missed part of your comments.
Did my face freeze in a pretty way or one of those ugly ways?
No, it was pretty bad.
Well, I thought it was ugly.
It probably doesn't even matter. Like, I think if my face is freezing, it's just going to be ugly.
You're all good.
Your input, Myles, on like where and how can we improve in the world of corrections? How can that training environment improve?
So I think there's some things that can be done. You know, obviously, it was kind of a unique thing. So I know Command Presence partnered with TCI to build this huge statewide leadership training model. It was really, really successful, put across the state, and it was a wonderful investment on TCI's part. And so I think even putting that out there, I think it has to be unique. And I can only speak for Tennessee, right? And because every state's different, the way corrections and detention are handled. But if it falls under the sheriff's office purview, like it does in the state of Tennessee, sadly, for the state of Tennessee, that's one of your first objectives as a sheriff. That's by statute. That's really the first thing you have to take care of, and it's your biggest investment money wise, whether in personnel or just spending. It's your biggest liability, but it's your very last training dollar, and it makes very, very little sense. But I do think there's things that can be done. And honestly, I think it's as simple as an invitation. I think, building courses specifically for corrections, making sure those folks are taken care of in detention, and giving them what they deserve. I think it's absolutely possible, but I think it has to be out there. And I think ILEETA is doing a wonderful job of kind of reconnecting some of those out into corrections, because we're kind of missing half the boat.
I know Ron Scheit, he's on the advisory board there, and he's been instrumental in trying to recruit a lot more corrections folks to join ILEETA and come to the conference. And it would be wonderful to see a lot more corrections folks at the conference. And I know we've been looking for some corrections specific classes for the ILEETA conference.
Yeah, I think my dear friend Mike Cantrell from out there, I think is getting involved, and I'm really glad to see that.
Very nice. Myles, everything you told us tonight takes a special kind of person to do what you're doing, and you have to have some very skilled leadership abilities and skills to do that. And I know you just taught a class recently for command presence, and I think it was what was it? Leading
without rank.
Leading without rank. What are some key components to that course, Leading Without Rank, that you can give to our audience tonight?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, to me, there's two things that really stand out, and one really strikes a chord with me. The first one, Leading Without Rank starts out with a very simple question: why do I know what I know? Why do I believe what I believe? And why do I do what I do? And to me, in the objective driven model, right, where I'm looking at, well, what sense does this make? Why are we actually doing this kind of reframing thing? That makes total sense to me, especially, when you talk about that leadership role. Like, why do I believe this? Great, wonderful example that I teach in that. And I talk about everything from the theory of constraints to problem reframing, so on and so forth. And Dwayne, you'll understand this quite well. We had a choke point on our firearms range, right? And I'm looking at a picture, and it took us 34 years to figure it out, that the actual firing line is the choke point, right? I need to train more, but I've only got this many targets. And when you look at the picture, and I've asked classes since then, show me what we got. And nobody ever picks up. There's a burn to the left and the right. It's a 180-degree range. In 34 years, nobody ever thought, well, maybe we can just shoot targets over there, right? And so, why do I believe what I believe? And so we doubled at least our effective training time by opening up target points. It was right there in front of our eyes, and we just never done it. And so, why do I know what I know? Why do I believe what I believe? And why do I do what I do? I think where that really comes from, especially from command presence and that leading without rank, is a real self-reflective kind of question. Like, why do I know this? And the second big point that I think is crucially important is the circle of influence, right? There's things, that you can directly affect, and there's things you can't. And in leadership, we're trying to influence others. And so, for the better, obviously, we're trying to grow that area of influence. And so I think that's a wonderful part of that class that maybe is missed on some people, that like all of us sitting on here have a really large reach of influence, and being able to use that and project that positively, to me, is certainly what leadership is about. And so much so, even when I teach instructor development locally, the whole class is centered around influence, whether that be nonverbal communication, verbal communication, everything, how to increase that, in a positive way for those around you.
Awesome. We've got about 5 minutes left, so I want to go around the horn, so we can Dwayne and Dan can ask their final questions, and then we'll wrap this up. So, Dwayne, final question, comment, thought for Myles.
How did I know you're going to pick me first? Well, one of my questions is, what have you said for the last 3 minutes? Because they're all blurred out for me, and I didn't catch a darn thing. So I'm not exactly sure where to go with this.
Dwayne, you want me to go first while you think it through?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, because I'm struggle busting right now.
Take it away,
Ready,
Dan.
Dan.
No, I've already been putting a lot of thought into this. So, stuffing or mashed potatoes? Huh?
Great question.
Yeah.
I'd probably have to go mashed potatoes.
All right.
Nothing,
All right.
Nothing but comes before the casseroles. That's what tomorrow's all about.
Mashed potatoes from
Green bean casserole with some water chestnuts in it and stuff.
All the casseroles.
All right. All right. There you go,
All right.
Dwayne. I got the hard one out of the way.
Here's my question: turkey or ham?
Ham. Ham, unless it is a deep fried wild turkey. And if it's wild or smoked or fried, I love it. But if it's just a butterball turkey, I'm not a huge fan.
Well, hey, you know what? Thanks, Dan, for kind of changing the topic. I mean, I really want to dive into leadership stuff, but we only got 4 minutes left. But
Well, let's face it. It's what I believe in. What do I believe and why do I believe it? I believe in mashed potatoes over stuffing. How do I get my circle of influence to also agree?
but you know, I
Go ahead, Brian.
go ahead, Myles. Myles, go
No,
ahead.
it was not a good comment. It was just about deviled eggs and circle of influence. You know what I mean?
Well, I think it's.
Oh, you don't want to know what that does to my stomach nowadays.
I think it's a kind of a meaningful conversation to go to what are we all thankful for? The last 4 minutes, go around the horn. We'll start with Myles this time. Myles, what's something you are thankful for on this Thanksgiving Eve?
So I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I'm really, really thankful for ILEETA. And so I'm thankful for a ton of things, right? For my family and everything. But professionally, I'm thankful for the folks that I work with at the academy. I'm really thankful for my instructors. I'm thankful for my recruits. They do a wonderful job. And I'm thankful for the people that I work with, Miss Holly and everybody. I'm thankful for ILEETA because, as I was joking about earlier, it gave me a chance to meet and converse with people like Dwayne that I only read right on the internet prior to, a couple years ago. And it gave me the chance to communicate with those people and try new things and try to make things better, which was what I wanted. And the ability to have those conversations with no ego, right, at the ILEETA conference, and then to be able to present, gave me a voice. And professionally, ILEETA has done so much for me that I'm truly, in my heart of hearts, thankful for everybody at ILEETA.
Thank you for sharing that, Myles. Dan, what are you thankful for? Dan froze up again. Dwayne, what are you thankful for?
I'm thankful for my ILEETA brothers and sisters, those people that I can call upon when I have a question or have a need. By the same token, the people can call on me when they have a question or a need, because that is the spirit of the organization. That is what drives us. It is all about being a mentor and being mentored, and that is all about leadership.
Thank you for sharing, Dwayne. Dan, are you there with us now? I seen him moving a little bit ago. He still froze up. Well, I'll go. I'm thankful for a lot, but I'm again, just like you all, I'm thankful for ILEETA. ILEETA has done a lot for me. I'm just a kid from a small town in Nebraska and had no idea where I wanted to go in life. Joined the Marine Corps, went into law enforcement, went to this ILEETA conference, and now here I am hosting ILEETA Live and doing some wonderful things for ILEETA. And I'm thankful for all the leadership that has believed in me from ILEETA. But most of all, first and foremost, I'm thankful for my family. I'm a huge family person. Something I learned from my dad that Brian Willis has reinforced. It's not just being thankful, but it's thanking others. My dad has instilled this in me since I was just a little whippersnapper. Always say thank you to others. And Brian Willis talks about this all the time. If you're at a hotel, thank the person that is cleaning your room. Thank the bellhop. Thank the taxi cab driver. Thank the Uber driver. Go out of your way to say thanks. It makes you feel better when you make others feel better. So thanks for Brian Willis to continue my dad's legacy, who is no longer here, to encourage us all to say thank you a lot more. Dan, your turn. What are you thankful for?
Well, I think so. You guys hit on a lot of big ones: God, family, friends. is a staple for me in terms of that being grateful for those type of things. But connecting it to the conversation we had today, I'm thankful that I'm still in other people's circle of influence, and I get the chance to join you guys on a day like this and listen and learn and meet new people and let them influence me.
Thank you for sharing, Dan. Before I hand it over to Myles for his last thoughts, words of wisdom, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in, and those that are going to be watching later. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget about the ILEETA holiday pop-up. There's some great items for sale there. There's the link there. Check your email. It's in the email. December 10th is the next deadline for the ILEETA Journal, and we would love to have you write for the ILEETA Journal. Myles, you have the last word, sir.
Last word. Well, I look forward to it. I would say this: next time you're training, ask yourself why you're doing it a certain way, and whatever you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it, and what does success look like at the end of that training day or when they leave. And if you work that in reverse, right, many times you'll find you might be missing part of what you're needing. And I know it certainly helped me.
Thank you, Myles. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Dwayne. To all of you out there watching, happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy your time tomorrow with your family. If you're working, please be safe out there. Myles, hang on with us once we end the stream.
Absolutely.
You all have a wonderful night. Thanks for joining us.